Hi, my name is Steve Assie. I'm head of Canada for Thomson Reuters. I was here today with two partners from Torys LLP who are widely regarded in the market as leaders in M&A and transactional work. Mike Om is co-head of Torys M&A practice. Rima Ramchandani is co-head of Torys capital markets practice. Rima and Mike regularly lead transactions, domestic and international, for leading Canadian and international clients. I had a phenomenal discussion with them about mergers and acquisitions in Canada, how best to prepare for them, and what to do once a proposal is received. Please enjoy. So Mike, maybe I'll start with you. Can you tell us why M&A preparedness is important for public companies?
Sure. Hey, Steve. A sale transaction is really a seminal event for a public company. It's obviously a major liquidity event for shareholders, and it can be transformative for other stakeholders, customers, suppliers, business partners, and the like. And being prepared in that context is really important in order to achieve optimal results for your stakeholders and also to satisfy your regulatory and legal obligations for directors. And it's a real possibility in the current market that a public company can receive an M&A proposal. Certainly, we've seen that M&A activity has remained robust. And we've seen, although there are swings, depending on the industry, for example, resources right now, financial services and technology seem to have more activity, but it does swing, and it's important to be ready. And we see M&A proposals take a variety of different forms. Some are early stage, preliminary. Others are ready to execute. Some may be friendly, others unwelcome, hostile even. And the public company really needs to be ready for any of these scenarios.
So Rima, what should a company do when a proposal does come?
So there really is no one-size-fits-all approach to how companies respond. As Mike said, the forms that these proposals take are varied, right? It might be an oral offer, it may be in writing, it may go to the board or the chair or to the management team. The insider might be the one that's actually making the bid. So all of these facts obviously really inform the way a company responds to a proposal. But high level, when a proposal comes in, if it hasn't gone to the board, it needs to go to the board, right? The board really has a critical oversight process over any M&A transaction. So, it needs to go to the chair if the chair hasn't seen it. And then ultimately the chair of the board usually sort of decides how best to inform the rest of the board. And the urgency with which that happens, we often get this question, and how quickly, it'll depend on the facts, right? How credible is the proposal? Is it attractive? Is the bidder a known party, a reputable party? What's the state of the company, right? Is it in financial distress? Is there some business imperative to transact? All of that will inform how quickly the board goes. There's a few other things that companies do, when we're thinking about in-house legal teams and general counsel, when they come and talk to us about this. You're going to assemble a working group. Confidentiality is really key, right? So that's a small working group, right? You want to keep the number of people in the tent pretty small. That's going to include key members of management. They're pretty important in terms of assessing any proposal, right? You're going to think about the valuation of the company. Management has to be a part of that. Your external advisors, your lawyers, financial advisor, all of those people are going to get assembled at the outset. Companies often will be quick to put in a trading restriction to make sure that all those insiders that are in the tent aren't trading in the company's stock. And if the bidder's a public company, you might want to caution not to trade in the bidder's stock as well, because it might be material for the bidder. Monitoring trading activity in general in an M&A deal is quite important, right? Leak risk is high. So we know the regulators are monitoring that trading activity. And if they see unusual trading activity, it's not uncommon for them to call our clients, ask, what's going on, and maybe even require you to put out a press release. So having a calm strategy to deal with that is one of the first things we advise our clients to do. And then finally, management's going to brush off their forecast, look at the strat plan, update it. All of those inputs are going to be really important for the board and the financial advisor to sort of assess any proposal.
So, Mike, there's an increasing focus on related party transactions.
how do parties identify and manage those conflicts in those relationships?
Right. So, Steve, you're absolutely right. A lot of focus increasing in recent years on conflicts, on related party transactions. Where there are conflicts that aren't identified and aren't managed well in a transaction, it can cause real problems that companies and transaction parties really need to be aware of. It can basically hurt the ability for the company to carry out a really effective process. It can limit its ability to seek alternatives, and it can also create reputational damage. So really, the first thing that we do in an M&A process when we're talking to a target company or a board is ask about conflicts and ask them, let's identify the conflicts, and once we've identified them, let's manage them. And what do we mean by conflicts? We mean the classic types of cases. You've got a large shareholder who has a director on the board. Obviously, there's going to be, and that shareholder's making the bid. That's going to be a type of conflict. Mm-hmm. It could also be where you have a member of management or the management team itself taking the company private. And that's another obvious source of conflict. So the idea is to first identify these conflicts and then manage them. And there's a variety of tools that companies use. Sometimes they'll just recuse a director who has a conflict from the proceedings of the board. Other times they'll establish a special committee. And sometimes the other aspect is when management's involved in almost any sense, the board really has to be keeping oversight on management, especially with respect to its communications with bidders and other parties to ensure that there is actually a level playing field in any process that's being run. One particular issue I'll touch on is special committees. And special committees serve a variety of roles. Yes, they can insulate against conflicts, but also from an M&A perspective, generally for a target company, for directors, it's a very time-intensive process. And getting the whole board together regularly can be very difficult when you have to act nimbly, when things are moving quickly in a transaction. So having a smaller group of directors who have the expertise and the time for the vote can really facilitate nimbleness and good, quick decision making. The other thing for special committees, as you'd expect, they should be consisting of entirely independent directors, and they should think about whether they do require separate advisors from the company. And finally, they really should manage the process, keep good records, and seek advice. And these are the types of things these are the tools that public companies can use to help manage conflicts in these cases.
So Rima, what is the role of management responding to proposals? What should companies watch out for?
Management is really critical in any kind of effective M&A process. And Mike talked about conflicts. And there's an inherent conflict with management on a change of control transaction, right? The obvious is this may impact my job, right? It may impact my compensation, my team, the strategy, what is the company and my daily living going to look like after the deal goes forward? So there's always this tension on an M&A deal with management and, making sure that you're being very alert up front to that inherent kind of conflict. That's why it's really critical for the board to have oversight, right, of the process. But management's input is critical. Like they know the business better than anybody, right? It's their forecast, it's their strat plan. They understand all the risks, the opportunities, the challenges that lie ahead. So the board will want to know, what does management think about the proposal, and what does management think about the status quo and the prospects going forward? So that's really, really critical. But as Mike said, the conflicts always loom large. And so boards do, what they ordinarily do when they meet, which is, management's present for a lot of those meetings, but really important that they step out and that the board meets without management present and that the minutes reflects that, right? Process, for lawyers, process is king, right? You really have to follow a good process because ultimately, if this results in an actual transaction, this will all become public. If you eventually come to a negotiated deal and you take it to your shareholders and you recommend it, everything that the board does from the moment that proposal comes in to the moment they announce the deal, it will be public. And so really having a process that is robust and informed and properly documented is quite critical.
So that's in response to a proposal coming in. But Mike, I'm curious, what sort of advanced M&A planning should companies do?
Well, that's a very important point, Steve. When an M&A proposal comes, there's not a lot of time typically. And there can be many pressures on the company, on the management team and the board. And so being prepared in advance allows essentially much greater freedom of action. You have things at least somewhat lined up in advance. You know where to begin. It allows you to be more effective. And at the end of the day, our goal is to ensure or facilitate optimal outcomes for the company, for its stakeholders. Being prepared is a pretty big part of that. And so from a practical perspective, when we're meeting with management teams and boards, and we're talking about what are the types of things that you might do, in advance, you might be looking at a working group. Who are the key members of management that you're going to need? CEO, CFO, business development, communications people. That's important. What external advisors are you going to need? Certainly lawyers, investment bankers. Are you going to have a PR or a government relations firm to help you? You need to figure that out. Who might be the special committee members? And give some thought in advance to who they are. Other important things are to keep up-to-date financial projections, financial models for the business, because when a proposal comes, the board and management need some yardstick to measure it against, and certainly knowing what your financial model is and keeping that updated is pretty important. Other things are have a data room so that you're not scrambling when a proposal comes. And these steps can be taken well in advance, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. We see clients do a variety of different things to be prepared. Some will actually have an M&A preparedness playbook, a very detailed plan about what they might do, and that works well for some clients. Others will consider these types of issues periodically and talk about it at board meetings, have management sessions. And so it really spans the waterfront in terms of what people do. And the key is it needs to be appropriate for the company and ultimately foster effectiveness when that proposal comes.
So, Rima, when a proposal does come in, how should companies evaluate it?
Yeah, so again, there's a theme, no one size fits all. I think the most important thing, for boards and companies is when a proposal comes in, is to take the time you need to properly and carefully assess it. Bidders will often use time as a tactic, right, to put pressure on. They lob in a proposal and there'll be a deadline for a turnaround that is maybe quite aggressive. They'll ask for exclusivity right out the gate. So there's often sort of a lot of timing pressure used for companies to move quickly. And from the company's perspective, both board and management, it's important not to fall prey to that, right? The board really needs to take the time, whatever that time may be, to make a considered and reasoned view. In terms of what you do, really the range of alternatives is open. The most important thing is following a good process, getting advice, and making an informed decision. So it is open to boards and companies to say, we're not going to engage with the bidder. Just because someone makes you an offer doesn't mean we're going to start negotiating. It is appropriately reasonable alternative to conclude we're not going to go forward and that the company isn't for sale. That might be the right decision for that company at that time. If the company looks at the offer and it's an attractive sort of preemptive price, the bidder is very credible, and they decide to engage a bit further, then the board's gonna, with the help of its advisors, legal and financial, start to explore what this bid looks like. And that's going to be involve management, as I said, looking at the financials, looking at the valuations, sort of stress testing this price, thinking about whether it's appropriate to grant exclusivity. Are we prepared to go forward on an exclusive basis with the bidder? Or are we going to conduct some sort of a market check? We often get asked by companies, do we have to perform a market check? And the answer is no, you don't have to. But a market check is a really broad term, and it can be a range of things, right? It can be a limited review by your financial advisor of here's the most likely bidders out there. Here are other sort of comparable pure transactions and their terms, and to give the board and the company a sense of, here's what we think the competitive market would look like, to a full-blown auction, right? Where you invite the bidder to participate and make an outreach to the universe of potential bidders and actually see, if you can drum up a better price. So really, again, lots of range of outcomes that the board can pursue, but the key is taking the time, getting the advice, making a reasoned decision, and then making sure your board minutes all reflect everything that you've done.
Yeah. So, Mike, how does a friendly M&A transaction proceed?
Right. So most friendly deals in Canada are going to proceed by way of a plan of arrangement. And an arrangement transaction, rather than a takeover bid. You can do takeover bids, but they tend to be quite rare, and probably upwards of 90% of friendly transactions in Canada proceed by way of a plan of arrangement. So what's a plan? Well, a plan is essentially a court and shareholder approved statutory process whereby a buyer can acquire 100% of a target company in a single transaction. So it's a very efficient way to get M&A done. It's also allows for a lot of tax structuring flexibility, and hence that's really been the popular way to do it. But if we look at sort of the key steps along the way of an M&A process, typically, I want to just hit on a few of them that are pretty important. One is the NDA, and obviously that's mostly to keep the information that you're going to share with your bidder confidential. But it also typically includes a standstill feature, and that standstill feature prevents a bidder from launching a hostile takeover bid, acquiring securities, and otherwise frustrating an auction type process while they are conducting diligence, while they are speaking to the target company. And why that's really important is control. Control of a process allows a company to ensure that it's getting the best outcome, whether, as Rima says, that is sometimes the status quo, or whether that is going after other opportunities and starting a broader process. You can only do that if you are controlling the time and the cadence in which the deal flows. So that's really important. After that, you'll have the bidder typically perform its diligence, and you'll be negotiating the transaction agreement. Once the transaction agreement is negotiated, you'll sign it, and that announcement, it will be publicly announced right away. After that, you've got a shareholder meeting, and you've got the final court process, which is a fairness hearing. Ultimately, the court is saying, if I'm going to bless this transaction, I have to be convinced that it's fair to the company and its stakeholders. So how long does it take? That's a question we get often from our clients. Well, it can be short. From the day you sign the agreement to the day that the whole transaction is completed. You can do that in many cases less than 3 months if we don't require long drawn out regulatory approvals, whether that is competition or foreign investment or industry specific. Mm-hmm. Those can have the result of deals actually being out for a year, as long as a year. Hopefully that won't be the case in the transaction for a particular company, but it is a possibility that needs to be planned for.
So that's a friendly transaction. Rima, how does a hostile transaction proceed?
So hostile bids are rare in the Canadian market. They do occur, particularly where you have, targets that are particularly vulnerable, like they're in sectors that are challenged, or where there may be multiple parties that are sort of circling and have interest. A hostile bid compared to a friendly deal. Should I stop?
Yeah, let's.
That was early. So that's a friendly bid. Rima, how does a hostile bid proceed?
So hostile bids, and a hostile bid is one that's not supported by the board or it's not welcome from the board. They're rare in the Canadian market. They do occur, particularly where you have target companies that are more vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. They're in difficult sectors, or where there may be multiple parties that are sort of circling and interested. A hostile bid, unlike sort of a friendly board-supported one of the type that Mike just described, is one where the bidder sort of makes the offer direct to shareholders. So it's sort of going around the board, right? We have robust rules under Canadian securities laws that govern these types of bids. And about 7 years ago, our bid rules were amended to make bids more shareholder friendly and to curtail some, bidder tactics that were felt to be a bit coercive. So when a bidder makes a hostile bid now, the bid has to be open for 105 days. It's fairly lengthy, fairly lengthy period of time. The bid has to have a 50% minimum tender condition, which basically means that at least 50% of the shares not owned by the bidder have to be tendered to the bid. And then once that tender condition is met, the deposit period has to be extended for 10 days. So all of this is meant to give, shareholders more time to assess and decide whether to support and tender the bid. But importantly, the board of the target more time to beat the bushes on any alternatives, right? Because this is a hostile bid. We've come to the board said no for a reason. So you're going direct to the shareholders. Now this 105-day period allows the board to really go out and figure out whether there are other alternatives. The target board has to put out a director's circular in response to the bid within 15 days and provide a recommendation to shareholders. So what ends up happening while the bid's open in a hostile bid is it becomes a little bit of a PR campaign between, the bidder, the target board. Sometimes other market participants emerge during that time. So if there's a competitive bidder that's interested, they may surface and get into the process, try and top the bid that's been made. Shareholders will occasionally pipe up and say what they think, if they're in support or not in support. And sometimes, what starts out as a hostile bid turns into a friendly one. So the bidder ends up, negotiating with the target board. They amend the terms of the bid and turn it into something that the board can support. And then the parties go on in a friendly way. So they do happen. They're kind of fun when they do happen. Fun for lawyers, less fun for management teams because they're, M&A is always a very time-intensive process. A hostile bid, really time-intensive for boards and management team.
Is it more rare in Canada just because of the nature of the rules around it?
I don't know. I think hostile bids are, part of it is the Canadian market is much smaller than the American market, right? So the deal flow is just dramatically different. It's more expensive. It's more time consuming. I think, this is a bit anecdotal in Canada. We're a little bit more friendly generally, right? There's reputational risk you take in making a hostile bid. I think that not a lot of bidders necessarily want to be viewed in that light. So, we've had examples, high profile examples in the Canadian market. So we certainly see it. It's just, certainly the path of least resistance to getting a deal done is to have the support of the board.
So Mike, if the company does need to take defensive measures, what does that look like? How do they do that?
So that's an area of large debate in Canada. It more debate in the past because it's largely being settled. But in the U.S., you see situations where you've got a poison pill and that's going to remain in place almost indefinitely, or you'll see a staggered board, or you'll see other structural type defenses. Well, those are generally either not permitted or not effective in Canada. And our securities regulators have been pretty clear that really the key things in any bid are to preserve shareholder choice, that shareholders do have the choice to choose between different alternatives, and they can't be coerced in doing so. And any type of defensive measure that results in coercion or restricts freedom of choice is going to be very carefully monitored by our regulators, and likely they'll intervene. So what does a board, what does a target company do in those circumstances? What is their defense? Well, their defense is really to show shareholders we have a strategic plan. It makes sense. Have shareholders understand that, see the value in that we have a management team who can execute, and that we're going to get our message out and convince shareholders that really the status quo or some element of what we're doing is the best way forward for the company and stakeholders in terms of maximizing value and outcomes. So it's really know your shareholders, be alive to what they're thinking, and don't start that process only once the hostile bid has come. It's really a question of being in tune with the market and your shareholders in advance. And if you are doing that right in advance and the company can really tell its story, that's what's ultimately going to prevail and give the company the best chance in resisting a bid. As Rima said, resisting a bid may be attractive depending on the nature of the bid. But remember, the job of the board at the end of the day is to get the best outcome.
Yeah.
The best outcome for the company and stakeholders. And that bid may be it, but not necessarily. It may be the company's status quo, or it could be other offers from other people who are out there. And it's the board's job to navigate that and make those decisions.
Well, thank you both so much for coming in today. What I'm taking away from this conversation is that management teams and boards do have a lot of obligations after a proposal is made, but there's actually a lot that they can do before one's made to kind of get ahead of it. So I really appreciate that and encourage anyone who's interested in finding out more to go to Torys' website and find out more about both of you and reach out and make contact.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve.